one of the major problems that existed in the Jewish world in the beginning of the 18th century, the 1700s, was the inheritance of the terrible events of the 17th century. We always deal with centuries as though they are arbitrary lines and can really separate time and events, but in the real world that doesn't make a difference. And the events of 1648 and 1649, the great pogroms, the Gzeres Tach V'Tat, that occurred when 250,000 Eastern European Jews were destroyed. So until our time, until the 20th century at least, that was considered big numbers. And it was an enormous tragedy for the Jewish communities. And that was followed by the false messiah of Shabtai Tzvi in the 1650s. And then that was followed by the reaction against Shabtai Tzvi, almost the witch hunt against his supporters or people who believed in him. So that when we come into the beginning of the 1700s, the Jewish world is pretty much reeling from the blows that have been inflicted upon it. And we have to also add to the equation a very important item, and that item being the ideas of the Enlightenment, which was also the product of 17th and early 18th century Europe, Western Europe, England, France. And the ideas of the Enlightenment undercut established religion. It was basically anti-Christian, or if not anti-Christian, anti the church. But it also turned out to be anti the ideas of and traditions of Judaism, because of the fact that it undercut those ideas as well. And the issue therefore was how to deal, how to somehow confront these ideas of modernity and of the Enlightenment. Now, this was especially painful because Messianism was pretty much dead. I mean, after you have Shabtai Tzvi, and after you have a false Messiah, and after the debacle that occurred, and the shame and embarrassment that it brought upon the Jewish people. So the belief in the Messiah, even if it's present, but it certainly is no longer public up front that this is going to be the solution to our problems. Because the problem of false messianism was much worse than the problem of no messianism. And in line with that, you have all of this weakening of the Jewish communities, the Eastern European Jewish communities, from 1648 on, for the next 300 years till the Holocaust, till the time when the communities are destroyed. It's almost straight downhill for Jews in Eastern Europe, at least economically, socially, and in terms of the relationship of the government to it. The government becomes more and more oppressive. By the early 1700s, most Jews live under the czars already, and the czars are terribly anti-Semitic. The independent Poland is gone. Lithuania, all of this will be annexed into the Russian kingdom. And There are no answers. That's the problem. The questions are enormous and there are no answers. The questions are, how do you sell poverty? Eventually you cannot sell poverty. You can be proud of it for one generation or two, but eventually poverty is not attractive. When the rabbi said, Ani chashuv kemet, that a poor man is considered as though he's dead, they knew what they were talking about. And there are individuals that can bear poverty, but that an entire society should bear poverty, that has never been successful. And I think that's a problem that we face here in Israel today, and certainly in our community, where poverty has become a way of life. Eventually there will be a generation that will say that's not the way of life they want. That's exactly what happened with the immigrant generation that came to the United States. The Jews that ran to the United States and came here, and they were running from poverty. And they were so afflicted and affected by poverty that their drive to get ahead and not to be poor dominated everything else in their lives. So if not to be poor meant you have to work on Shabbat, so you worked on Shabbat. If not to be poor meant that you had to do things that were not necessarily in line with Jewish tradition, so that you did them. And you wanted your children to advance, and you wanted them to have the education and the tools not to be poor. And that lay at the basis of the defection in American Jewry from tradition and from observance, was the fact that it was an enormous reaction to poverty. So the Jews are poor, the Jews are persecuted. Well, you say, well, it always was like that. Well, not necessarily. The Jews the first 300 years in Eastern Europe were not that poor, and they were not that persecuted. It wasn't the golden age of Spain, but it was not an age of terrible persecution. I mentioned from the middle of the 1600s onward till Hitler, you have it's a straight downward curve. Things become progressively worse and worse. And also, for the first time now, all of a sudden there's an alternative that's offered. And that was the role of the Enlightenment, that there is an alternative. There's a way out of this. The way out of it always used to be to convert to Christianity, but Jews weren't buying into that. The Jewish defection to Christianity was always minimal until the 19th century. The 19th century saw a great wave of conversions. I'm talking about voluntary conversions. I'm not talking about Spain and the Inquisition. But now the alternative was offered by the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment promised the Jews, promised everyone, but the Jews included. It promised them citizenship, it promised them equality, it promised them a better life. But there was one condition. The condition being that, in effect, the Jews had to become enlightened people, which meant giving up much of Judaism, because that doesn't fit into the box of the ideas of the Enlightenment. And this was the challenge. And this challenge, to a great extent, still exists today. Hasn't been removed from the board. Except today, the ideas of the Enlightenment have been accepted in all of Western society and practically in all the civilized world. And so now it's being pushed a notch further. But the ideas of a secular society, that until the 1700s, there were only religious societies. There were no secular societies. And a person was defined more or less by one's religion. From now on, one will be defined by either one's country or, with the advent of Marx and others in the 19th century, it'd be defined by class or by race. But religion no longer was the benchmark of definition. And this, therefore, was very tempting to Jews. Now, in the history of the Jewish people, as far as I know, and that's not much, but as far as I know, the Jews have always assimilated and intermarried when the non-Jewish world would allow them to do that. And if you'll say, well, why didn't Jews intermarry in 12th century France? It's because the 12th century Frenchmen wouldn't allow it. And why didn't they intermarry in 17th century Poland? Is because, again, the church would not allow it. So you had to remain Jewish. You had no alternative. But the moment the door opens up, you know, the moment that former Vice President Gore can have a Jewish son-in-law, and Carolyn Kennedy can marry a Jew, and it's not a stigma, and Jews even say they can run for president and think that they have a chance, and maybe they do. So then the non-Jewish world has changed radically. And unless one therefore has a great sense of self-worth, self-identification, unless one defines one's Jewishness positively and not negatively, so we used to define it negatively, to all the non-Jews hate us. I mean, to a certain extent, that's the problem in Israeli society today. Far be it from me to say propaganda before the elections. But everybody is running against something. Nobody's running for something. They're running against the Haredim, against the settlers, against the secular, against Lapid, against Sharon. Everybody's running against. But nobody has a vision of what? You know, now what happens? And the Duke of Wellington said the only thing worse than defeat is victory. Because when you're a victor, then you got to do something, right? The guys that lose the election, they go into the opposition, they're happy. They're still driving around their Volvos and there's no problem. But the guy that's sitting on the chair now, so now what do you do? And that always is a problem. So the assimilation and secularization of the Jewish people should not come, it comes as something that's very sad and tragic, and perhaps could have been avoided by developing a positive Judaism, so to speak, or by dealing with the challenges of the Enlightenment. But it should not be surprising to us that large sections of the Jewish people simply fell off. They just left. And we have the same problem today, you know. All of the Holocaust museums in the world and all of the recollection of the Holocaust, etc., will not create the Jewish people. Won't build it. That's not to denigrate studies of the Holocaust and remembrance of the Holocaust, all of which is necessary, but that's not our solution. Just as the state of Israel per se is not the solution to the Jewish problem either. You know, we see, in fact, the state of Israel has exacerbated all Jewish problems because it's a state, and you know. So anti-Semitism is more than it ever was, and the disputes within the Jewish people are very, very bitter and real, and they concern themselves with practical things, not just with ideology. It concerns itself with, you know, I have a brother-in-law that needs a job. You know, and I control the patronage, so I'm not going to give your brother-in-law a job when my brother-in-law needs the job, which will not necessarily endear the Jewish faith to you. So, how to be Jewish, this problem, which exists in the 17th century already, in the 18th century certainly, continues until today. And today it's especially so because in certain sections of the Jewish people you have very little choice. The choice is stark. Right? It's, the people who, God forbid, leave Yemei Ashurim, they go all the way. They're gone. So it's either or, the two extremes. But even if somehow you remain in the continuum, and it's not that stark, but today there are choices. There are myriads of choices. And there are different definitions of Judaism out there that weren't there 300 years ago. And therefore the problem is even more acute today, in my opinion, because there has to be a positive reason why one stays Jewish. Why one, you know, why should I, you know? Why should I subject myself to the discipline of Torah and mitzvot when society no longer, Jewish society no longer demands that of me? There was a time when the society demanded, you know, if you wanted to be a Jew, you know, and you wanted to be part of the Jewish community, so that was it. But today that's not it anymore. And therefore the entire, well, I would say the entire system of how to create Jews and how to educate Jews, we should take a hard look at it. And because this is no longer, you know, 18th century Eastern Europe. The situation has changed dramatically and radically. I don't say it changed for the better or for the worse. It's just it's different, though. And the ideas and tactics that were advanced 300 years ago may have no relevance in today's world and may be completely unsuccessful. So, in any event, this is what the Jewish people faced in the beginning of the 1700s. And they also faced tremendous inner disputes, which there never is a shortage of that within Jewish life. Jewish people are contentious people. And Moshe Rabbeinu said that already in the desert. Eicho eso levadi torchachem masachem v'rivchem. And there was very little to fight about. Right? You had, you know, free angels bread every day, and you were at leisure. You could learn all day. I mean, was it a door day? What was the problem? What are they fighting about? But everybody, you know. So you had great fights between great people. It wasn't limited to the lower class. And you had rabbinic disputes that had far-reaching effects. The dispute between Rabbi Yaakov Emden and Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, for instance, where Rabbi Yaakov Emden accused him of being a closet Sabbatean, a closet Shabsai Tzvi man. And so that split Europe, right? Every rabbi eventually had to take a stand on one side or the other. And whichever stand you took, you were wrong. And then there was a rabbinic dispute about a divorce that was given in the town of Cleva, whether the divorce was valid or not valid. Again, almost every rabbi in Europe had to take a stand on that too. So the whole fabric is being torn apart, both from the inside and the outside. So there were a number of reactions to this. Probably the most dramatic reaction, and what we could call the greatest revolution in Jewish life that was within the framework of Jewish tradition, was the rise of the Hasidic movement in the early 1700s. By the end of the century, the Hasidic movement had swept almost all of Eastern Europe. Had the majority of the Jews of Eastern Europe, Poland, Galicia, Ukraine, were affiliated with the Hasidic movement already. And even Lithuania, and White Russia, a little of it, that withstood the Hasidic onslaught, was very heavily influenced by it. And there were pockets of Hasidim there also. There were pockets of Hasidim all over Lithuania. Karlin and Stolin and other Slonim. Chabad basically was a White Russian Lithuanian Hasidus. The Hasidim made tremendous inroads. The success of Hasidus was due, first of all, to the great personalities that it attracted, people of enormous charisma. But part of the success, a great part of the success, was the fact that it became a popular mass movement instead of being an elitist movement. Until then, there always was an elite in the Jewish world. The elite were the Talmidei Chachomim, the scholars, the Rabbonim. They were the elite, but they were half of 1% of the population. What about the rest of the people? And the fiction that is perpetrated upon us that everybody in Eastern Europe was pious and learned is a dangerous fiction. Because then we can't understand, if everybody was pious and learned, how come they all became secular Jews? How come they became socialists and communists and anarchists and secular Zionists and everything, if everybody was pious and learned? The answer was that most people were not pious and learned, and that the practice of Judaism was more societal than it was a commitment. It was societal because you lived in a little shtetl. Most Jews, this is before urbanization, so most Jews lived in small rural towns, villages. 60 Jewish families, 80 Jewish families, 100 Jewish families. A big town had 200 Jewish families, with an equal number of non-Jewish families. And so it was the society, right? The society, you were a Shomer Shabbos because everybody was a Shomer Shabbos, Couldn't open the store. You'd be driven out of the little town. And the Jews were the Jews, and the non-Jews were the non-Jews, and the non-Jews didn't want the Jews to mix in their society, and the Jews didn't want to mix in their society. The Jews looked at the non-Jews, especially in that part of the world, they were illiterate, they were alcoholic, they were abusive. There was very little temptation. Later on, with the rise of reform in Germany that we'll discuss, well, in Germany it was a different matter, Your neighbor was Goethe and Schiller and opera, and they listened to Mozart, and it was a different non-Jew. And that non-Jew was attractive. He was He was neat and clean, orderly, efficient. There's a great difference between Poland and between Germany. That's why in Germany reform could succeed, in Poland it could never succeed, because reform basically aped the non-Jewish society, and the non-Jewish society in Eastern Europe was not attractive. What was attractive was changing the non-Jewish European society, changing the whole society, which was the idea of the left and of Marxism and of revolution that Jews were drawn to, because the Jews saw that the society they lived in was terrible. And therefore, in order to improve it, you had to revolt against it. So Chassidus didn't deal with the 0.5% on top of the pyramid. It dealt with the 99.5% that were under it. In order to do so, Chassidus had to emphasize different things. Chassidus did not create new, what shall I say, new values in the Jewish world. What it did is it changed the emphasis and the priority on existing values. I'll give you a few examples. Jews always prayed. Prayer was important. But prayer was not necessarily emphasized. Certainly in the elite, what was emphasized was study, learning, knowledge of Torah. We find that even later, that at least until the time of the Musar movement, which also emphasized prayer. The Musar movement is really the misnagdic form of Chassidus. Had the same purpose. But until, you know, it's a prayer, yeah. You come late for davening, you know, like daven it, and, you know, but let's get back to learning. In the middle of prayer, you're learning, you always take a book. By Chassidus, prayer was it. That was service of God. And that was a service of God that everyone could participate in. Everyone can hum a tune, except me. And everyone can be enthusiastic, and everyone can feel spiritual. But not everyone can learn a Tosfos. That's just a simple fact, even though it's belied by a great deal of the Jewish world who says, no, you know, everybody can be Reb Givega. But that's not honest. It's not true. Not everybody can do it. Not everybody's equipped either intellectually or even physically to be able to do it. It's again one of the, well, I think one of the great problems in our society is that we have, you know, one size fits all education. So, you know, everybody's learning Talmud at the age of 10, and that's it. So what happens is you have a lot of people that are turned off to Talmud by the time they're 15 and can't wait to get out of it, and are not interested to pursue it. And if that's the only alternative that you give them, so then they will find other alternatives. Chassidus emphasized faith, simple faith. So I'll tell you the truth, all the years that I had my yeshiva in Muncie, I was the head of it, I was always looking for a Rebbe to teach faith, to teach emunah. Never found him. Could find Rebbeim that taught Talmud excellently, every subject in Torah. I couldn't find anyone. And the truth is that without faith, the other things will not carry you. And the great Hasidic Rebbeim somehow, at least I'm talking 18th century, even most of the 19th century, till the Chassidus froze. I have a computer that freezes. Just, you know, stops in the middle, and that's it. Won't go further. That's what happened to Chassidus in the 1860s. Just stopped. So that what you see today is what was then. Even though we're 150 years later and it's a different world. But until then, Chassidus was able to mobilize millions of Jews and give them purpose and give them faith. Simple faith. You see it amongst our Sephardic brethren also, that there's an emunah pshuta, a simple faith. The Ashkenazim are far too sophisticated for simple faith. Even those of us who attend yeshiva, and but it's gauche to say, you know, I believe, right? We don't say that. Yeah, I understand, I know, I did, you know, but I believe? Because that's got to come all the way from the, you know, from the inside, from the kishkas. Not from here. Not from the mind. Not from the intellect. And it's a problem. You have to work on it all your life. There are moments of faith. There are moments that you feel it in yourself. But it's elusive. It's like holding quicksilver. You have to work on it all your life. And sometimes the moments are in times of joy, and sometimes, God forbid, they're in other times. But that's the struggle. That's the struggle. And Chassidus found a way to somehow do that. So that even though he couldn't read a Tosfos, or knew little or nothing about the Shulchan Aruch, but he really believed. You know, and if any of you have been exposed to Fiddler on the Roof, I never saw the movie, but I've read the play a number of times. Never saw the play either, but who can afford those things? But if you read it, Tevye, the main character, who was a simpleton, who has almost no intellect, whose main problem in life is that his cow doesn't give enough milk, and that he's got daughters that he can't get rid of, which is no small matter. But he's a man of faith. Talks to God, argues with him. Is a presence in his life. He's there. I don't know, I've struggled all my life that God should be a presence. I should feel him. So Chassidim used to say that Misnagdim are afraid of the Shulchan Aruch, but not of God, which was pretty harsh. And so the Misnagdim replied in kind that Chassidim are afraid that the Rebbe will find out about their sins. There's an element of truth in both. Because at the end of the day, after everything is over, and back of the Gemara, and back of the Torah, and back of everything, there stands God. And God is the one that we have to deal with. And that's a question of faith. And I think that if we're not for Chassidus, who knows what the Jewish people would look like, even though I am not a Chassid, and I don't aspire to be one either. But the enormous contribution was that it held masses of Jews together in faith. Many times the faith was because they had faith in the Rebbe. Because it's hard to imagine God, right? Tevye thinks, you know, that God is you know, he's the Poritz, he owns the ranch, right? That's who he thinks God is, right? Other people think that God is, you know, a successful head coach. Or, you know, he's a nice, benevolent old man. Everybody has a picture. So it's hard to believe in God, but you can believe in a Rebbe, because he's there. And once he's there, so then the Rebbe becomes the conduit. He becomes the way that you can have faith in God. Because you listen to the Rebbe and you're loyal to the Rebbe. You're influenced by him. That becomes the conduit. The example that was always given is we want to have this light. Well, how do we get this light? So we plug it into an outlet. But it's not the outlet that's giving the light. There's a generator somewhere in, near Hadera, the last coal-burning power stations in the world. And that's where the electricity is generated. Everything else is just a conduit. But to us, we don't think about the coal-burning generating station in Hadera. We think only about the plug. And if you plug it in, you know, so you're going to have electricity. And the Rebbe was the plug. If you plugged into the Rebbe, so then you had electricity. And every Rebbe had its own style, which was also good, because again, when you have one size fits all, then you automatically run into troubles. You know, so Chabad wasn't the Ukrainian Hasidus, it wasn't Apt, and Reb Shmelke wasn't the Pinchas Horowitz. Everybody had their own. And you could find your way. You had a wide variety of choices. The Misnagdim used to say as a bitter irony that the difference between a Misnagid and a Chosid is only one Rebbe. Meaning that the Chosid discounts all the other Rebbes too, right? Just like the Misnagid does. You know, it's only one. You know, the only difference is one. But the Chassidus swept the board because it provided an answer. It also was inclusive instead of being exclusive. It's done a 180-degree turn since. But it was inclusive. Everybody could come in. Didn't look to see how rigorous one's piety was. Chassidus was a fellowship. You ate together, you drank together. You went to the Rebbe together. You were part of a team. The phenomena of Hasidic dress is the same thing in the world today. You know, the National Football League or National Basketball Association makes hundreds of millions of dollars a year selling jackets that say, you know, Chicago Bears or New York Jets. I mean, why should I wear a jacket that says New York Jets when I am not a member of the New York Jets? The answer is, if I wear the jacket, I feel like I have a connection to it, right? Vicariously, I live in it. That's why I don't know how many millions of jerseys have been sold with Michael Jordan's name and number on it, right? Every kid wants to have it. Or to buy his gym shoes for $150 a pair. Why? The answer is, I'm connected. I'm also somebody now. I'm a member of the team. Look at the jacket I'm wearing. That has a lot to do with the dress. because the dress makes me a member of the team. If I don't dress like everybody else on the team, then somehow I have to earn my way. So earning your way is much more difficult than dressing your way. And Chassidus also provided a great social safety net. In a poor society, you need people to help each other. And Chassidus emphasized that. Emphasized the human relationship one with another. The fact that everyone needs help and that everyone should extend help. So you had this very, very powerful movement. Now Chassidus was criticized by its opponents for the change in emphasis. That learning in the Sefer HaTolados, which is one of the earliest books of Chassidus, Rabbi Yosef of Polnoe, so he says in 2 or 3 places that prayer is more important than learning, even though the Talmud says the opposite. But he says it's more important. Prayer is more important. So again, prayer is something that everybody can do. Learning is not something that everybody can do. So they were criticized because of, what do you mean prayer is more important? The Talmud says learning is more important. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. They were criticized for the fact that when you have a mass movement, there are always people on the fringes who indulge in excesses. And so the people who indulged in the excesses were held up to be the representatives of Chassidus instead of the core people who really were the representatives. Chassidus emphasized that prayer, for instance, required devotion. You had to prepare. You can't just walk in off the street and talk to God. So if you're supposed to pray at 7 o'clock in the morning and you don't feel like praying at 7 o'clock, and 7 o'clock in the morning you just know you have no enthusiasm for it, no feeling at all. So Chassidus said, well, it's better to wait to 8 or to 9 or to 10 or 11. And God is not bound by time. He'll be there. And maybe I said at 11 o'clock I feel like praying, right? I worked myself into the mood. And Misnagdim said, what are you talking about? The time of Kriya Shema is past. The time of Tefillah is past. Who cares about your mood? What happened to the Shulchan Aruch? So you have, opposing views. It's an interesting thing. You'll learn this in life too. Let's say you have a job, God forbid, in New York City, and you live double, God forbid, in Muncie. So that's an hour and a half on the Palisades Parkway. And you come home, you are drained. You are frazzled. You're in a terrible mood. And you walk in the house. So what's your reaction to your wife and children? You want to hear about her day? No, you don't. Children say, do homework with me, or you don't want, leave me alone. Now that attitude is murder. Destroys. It has to destroy. So what do? I can tell you only my personal experience. I used to sit in the car for a half hour. I used to make a point that I never came home. It's not my wife's fault. It's not my kid's fault. I would sit Till I felt better. When I felt better, I went in the house. I was more normal. Well, so Chassidim took that example regarding prayer too. What do you mean? You come to talk to God, you know, you're what are you crazy, right? Sit in the waiting room for a half hour. Maybe you'll feel better. Maybe you'll, you know, maybe you'll talk nicer. At least you'll collect your thoughts. My Rebbe always used to say, the yeshiva, he said, there are a number of things you have to think about in prayer. Number one, you have to think, you know, what if God is really listening? Which is something that we factor out of the equation always, right? He's not paying any attention. And, what if he's really listening? He may give you what you ask for. Then you're in trouble. And the second thing he would say is, what if you had only one wish in life? What would that wish be? So most of us don't think that way. And if we do think that way, we rarely come up with an answer. The Jewish joke is, I'd wish for another wish, right? But Chassidus says, well, before you pray, you have to consider those things, right? What are you going to ask for? What do you want? Yeah, you're knocking on the door 3 times a day. What do you want? Tell me what you really want. You say, I don't know. So, you know, so that somehow diminishes your power of prayer. And therefore you had this concentration on these ideas and also joy, happiness, Yivdus Hashem b'simcha, you know, because part of the inner worth of a person is that he's happy with himself. If you're not happy with yourself, you're no good to anybody. And depression is the worst of all diseases. Because I'm not happy with myself. I don't like what I'm doing. I don't like what I am. I don't like the way I look. I don't like anything. I don't like it. So then, you know, in line with what I said before, you know, if you're in a bad mood, your wife can serve you the best steak in the world, and it's awful, you know. If you're in a good mood, right, so, you know, just give me a bagel and I'm happy. 2 bagels. And this was the great contribution, to make people happy, to make them feel worthwhile, and to make davening, to make prayer a thing of joy that you look forward to. In our time, for instance, there's a phenomena called the Karlbach Minyan. It's a phenomenon which exists all over the world. So in our neighborhood, my neighborhood, it's really our neighborhood because the Prime Minister also lives there. So there's a shul, that big shul that's practically empty all the time. There's almost nobody there. Struggles. But once a month they have a Karlbach Minyan. They have a Karlbach Minyan, they have 1,000 people. Why? Because people want to be happy. People want, you know, people want to be uplifted. They want to go out in a good mood. Chassidus did that. Chassidus song, melody. They borrowed melodies from everyone. They borrowed it from the French army. The famous Chabad song is the marching song of Napoleon's troops. And many of the melodies that were incorporated in the Yomim Noroyim davening and the prayer service for the High Holy Days are taken from Polish, Russian, French, German songs. They were sanctified here. Just as many an Israeli secular song has found its way into Anim Zmiros. Nobody remembers Erev Shel Shoshanim anymore, but that's the tune for Anim Zmiros that everybody says. But it was a secular Israeli love song. But they took the melody and they put it to these words, and now that's it. So Chassidus was able to do that. Was able to make you feel good about it. So you had the camaraderie, you had the melody, you had the joy, you had the Rebbe. Right? Then you had something to eat and drink when it was over. My friend Rabbi Paperman of blessed memory always used to tell me that he had a position as a Rav in Plainfield, New Jersey. So there were still old European Jews that were there in the shul. So after davening, there was a Jew that would pour himself like an 8-ounce glass of whiskey and down it, you know. And Paperman would watch this every day. He went up to him once and he said, you know, he said, Rabbi Yaakov, he said, on an empty stomach? And the man said to him, and cornflakes on an empty stomach is good. So there's a feeling here. The only problem is when it becomes rote. When it becomes rote, so then it loses it again. So it has to constantly be refreshed. But then when it becomes rote, then that's going to be the melody, and that's the way they're going to do it. And so then it becomes again the problem that, you know, you don't feel like it. But the Chassidus had that quality of freshness and revolution to it. But the greatness of Chassidus is that it was always within the box. They didn't say it's mutter, you're allowed to eat this, or you're allowed to do that. They didn't say any of that. In fact, they constricted the box. And because of that, therefore, that's why it plays such an important role in Jewish life. All right, next time we'll continue on this discussion.